There we go. It's May 21st, 2026, and welcome to episode 131 of the Driving Forward podcast. Whether you're joining us live or listening on one of our 18 platforms, including Reese Across America Radio, where we broadcast every Tuesday evening from 4 to 5 p.m. Central Time, we appreciate your support. Next week, I'll be out, and we'll be running an old episode. We're revisiting freight fraud with Dale Prack, Steve Vest, and a small visit by Danielle Spinelli as well. This was a good episode from a couple months back, and just so it just worked out where Todd Waldron wasn't able to make it on Thursday. We were trying to do a recording. And we're going to have to push him out a couple of weeks, unfortunately. But we'll have Todd on soon to talk about what he's up to at Repower and just life in general. Following next week, we have Melanie Samard with Isaac Instruments. Melanie has a wonderful story. She's been in the industry for some time, started as a broker, moved into a role as a driver, drove for quite a while. She has a ton of stories on that, and I absolutely love chatting with Melanie. So really looking forward to this one. And if you haven't had the chance to learn about Melanie and her background, you should definitely tune in for that one. Upcoming events, we have the Midwest European Trucker event. That's in Chicago. Robert Bain is speaking at that. We have a few folks going to play some golf with the Minnesota Trucking Association. Mike Solars and I will be at Samsara Beyond from June 23rd through the 26th at ARIA. Following that, we have a variety of state organizations. I do have a speaking engagement at the TCA refrigerated meeting this year in Nashville. So looking forward to that also. Lots of activity over the summer. It's definitely busy. The conference season does not seem to slow down anymore. Maybe a little bit in August. We might get a little reprieve. Today, we're talking about the part of transportation people love to quote, but hate to live through. The doing the hard right over the easy wrong. And that's kind of a confusing set of words, but doing hard right over the easy wrong. Right now, transportation is testing everybody. DOT Blitz Week just put compliance under a microscope. Spot and contract freight strategies are getting more complicated, absolutely more complicated. Customers are still expecting speed, visibility, clean communications, even when the market is moving underneath everyone's feet. And it's absolutely moving. What the targets today are, they are not tomorrow. And now with the Supreme Court's decision in Montgomery versus Carib, brokers are being reminded that carrier selection is not just a rate decision. It can become a risk decision, a process decision, and potentially a legal decision. So today I've got Chris Sonnek from 10 Logistics joining me. Chris lives in the operational reality of this business, building processes, protecting service, managing customer expectation, and developing carrier relationships, and growing without letting discipline fall apart. So Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, good afternoon, Nate. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely great to have you on. I don't think you have not been on at all yet, right?
I have not. This is my debut.
Okay. Fair enough, the debut. So and just sort of getting into the world of podcasts here recently, for the most part, if I recall. So absolutely welcome to the show. I've had the pleasure. I've known you for a few years now, and we were talking the other day. So why don't we just put a show around this? So. First off, let's hear the Chris Sonnek story. How did you get in the industry, and what exactly do you do for 10 Logistics?
Yeah, well, my story's not too different than a lot of people. I really fell into the industry by accident. The summer after I graduated North Dakota State University, I was working as a Jimmy John's delivery driver, trying to figure out what my next steps are. And a buddy of mine said, "Hey, I work at this freight brokerage. We're hiring." And I said, "I don't have any idea what that is, but I'm in." That was back in 2018. We're here in the spring of 2026, and I'm still here. So kind of fell in on accident. Have been sticking it out. Entered in as an entry level freight broker, and as the business have grown, I've been able to grow with it. Going into from a broker to a team lead role, getting into customer facing activities, and now as an ops lead, overseeing the day to day of the floor, working with the sales team on customer execution, things like that.
Great. Yeah, that's a common story. You've been in the industry then for 8 years?
Yep, just about coming up on 8 this summer.
So once it gets your hooks into you, you don't really get out of it. So you're kind of in. It's very rare you see people leave the industry. So you've made it past that point of no return. You're stuck. So
yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chris, when you look at the freight market right now, what feels different over the last few years?
Right now, especially compared to the last couple of years, you can talk about a handful of different things. The most obvious one people are talking about is carrier quality and price. Rates going through the roof with tender rejections being high. We're seeing all this stuff on LinkedIn and in the news about rates just going crazy for open deck and reefer, things like that. So just looking at pricing as a whole from a carrier standpoint, as well as carrier quality in general. And I don't necessarily, I can't speak to much before COVID, but looking at carrier quality as a whole, I still am trying to figure out, was this something that was ongoing kind of in the darkness, and a lot of this stuff we've really just shined a light on it? Or are all these bad actors, as a lot of people like to say, really starting to pretty much work as hard as the good guys, right? Are they getting more creative? Are these scams and fraud getting more elaborate recently compared to previous years? Just kind of thinking, is this something new that we're just shining a light on, or has this been going on for years and years?
I was just having a conversation similar to this on how different the last 8 or 9 years have been, really, compared to normal cycles and normal situation. I mean, certainly some of this stuff was happening before, but I don't believe, we obviously weren't quantifying it, but I don't believe it was at the level that we're dealing with today. But that being said, could be entirely wrong. But, you look at double brokering, and it certainly happened in the past. A lot of times in the past, nobody cared because everything would get done right and whatnot. But now today, there's just too many errors happening at too many different levels and too many bad actors. So, yeah, there is the question of what exists previously and what are we just dealing with more now. That's a very valid question. So you hear people say that the market's changing, it's shifting. We've been talking about this now for probably the better part of 5-6 months. But from your seats, what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis? You kind of maybe hit on a few of those things previously, but what does that market changing statement mean to you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, kind of, with being on the brokerage side of things, it really centers around what your current carrier network is versus what your current demand from your customer or your prospects are, right? Saying, hey, we have what we refer to as our partner carriers in certain regions for certain lanes, saying, hey, our prices may differ slightly because of fuel, but nothing too crazy is going to be happening, for this summer compared to maybe 3-4 years ago when we just started to see the rates kind of start tanking, right? But for markets or for opportunities where we don't necessarily have the strongest capacity, that can mean a lot of different things because there's a lot more variance in terms of rates and modes, depending on what gets sent over to us, especially, on our side of business when we have into the spot market with a lot of stuff can come over short notice. That can really mean a lot of different things. So that's where the idea of transparency and visibility, especially with your customers, really comes in handy because we're not someone that's going to say, blindly accept a tender, blindly say we can do everything and anything. We want to keep that transparency going because one of the things that we want to avoid is it's Friday afternoon, it's 5:00 talking about bad actors, right? Maybe ignoring our carrier vetting rules just to get a shipment we don't normally run covered, and then all heck can break loose. So really keeping visibility and transparency open with our customers, because in this sort of changing market compared to the last couple of years, like you mentioned, we're really not wanting to put ourselves in a position of unnecessary risk just because an opportunity may have come out of nowhere that we haven't serviced before.
No, great answer. And it kind of leans into what I was thinking about talking about next, which is You mentioned that Friday 5 o'clock. I think that's the example a lot of people end up using it when it comes down to broken processes. But you're just trying to get out the door or whatever the case might be. There's other scenarios that are similar to that, but simply just we generally. I think you labeled it a different way. Maybe I put it together this way, or maybe you put it together this way. I don't remember. But the doing the hard right over the easy wrong. What do you see companies being tempted by the easy wrong right now? So a perfect example is that 5 o'clock process. But there's a lot of easy wrong in this industry that really needs to be shored up. So what do you see companies being tempted by right now?
Yeah, doing the hard right versus the easy wrong, that can apply to many different things, right? You can look at, from a customer's perspective, from a carrier perspective, right? Let's say a driver for one of your shipments picks up and delivers on time, goes through all the procedures, they're at their receiver maybe 4, 5, 6 hours, and you find some sort of reason to deny him detention, right? Versus maybe having to go through some sort of process to get approval on, hey, here's our documented in and out times, here's our detention policy, can we get approval on this and be able to take care of our driver? I've seen and heard plenty of instances where people might just try to pocket that accessorial charge, right? And from a customer's perspective, I was kind of hitting on it a little bit earlier with just saying yes to anything and everything, not necessarily knowing if it's something you can actually execute on, and dropping the ball, pushing loads days or weeks, saying, hey, we're still working on it, when the reality is you really don't have any legitimate option because you're still trying to make money. You'd rather push a load out 2 weeks and make money versus just take it at a loss and get it covered for the time it was supposed to be covered for. So things like that are probably what I see most consistently. And doing the hard right is saying, hey, maybe I have to lose a couple bucks on this shipment to get it picked up on time. Or from a carrier's perspective, hey, I have to go through a certain approval process or make sure, all my documentation is collected as soon as possible. Or even I'm just going to take care of this guy, even if I'm not going to get compensation from my customer, just because it is the right thing to do. And I want to be able to use this carrier multiple times and build that relationship.
Sure. No, I all of those great examples. It's definitely a lot easier to take shortcuts than to do things the right way. This is not the time to take those shortcuts. So absolutely, those are all solid points. You kind of answered this one too, but when freight gets tough, and it's starting to get tough, or potentially is, well establishedly difficult to cover. What separates a disciplined brokerage from one that starts chasing anything and everything that they can?
One thing that's key is really understanding what your team does really well and where your carrier capacity is, right? And I'll raise my hand to be the first one to say I don't get it right 100% of the time. I might get a little bit too aggressive in a market that our capacity isn't as strong as, and I have to be the one to kind of bite the bullet on that. But what comes with that is kind of the visibility and transparency to your customer on what you're currently doing to solve that problem or move that shipment, right? So when it comes to really understanding what's going on right now in a shifting market, it's how well do you know your carrier capacity network? How often are your carrier sales reps not only looking for new capacity, but also really just reoccurring check-ins with your current drivers? Because in the spot market we're in on a majority of our business, we might not necessarily have the exact same lane every Tuesday and every Thursday, but we know we're going to have something that week out of that region, and we can still plan accordingly just by keeping tabs on our current carrier base. And so it really comes down to how well do you understand what's going on, because the variance and the what am I trying to say here? The uncontrollables and the unknown about what your network and what your freight is really going to lead to those disasters of losing out on a ton of money or disappointing a customer because you can't be honest about coverage and things like that.
Sure. Yeah, you can only control certain things, and there's variables that are far outside your control. So that then turns into a service discussion. So based upon some of that, DOT Blitz was last week, I think.
Yep.
So we had, everything from ELDs, hours of service, cargo securement, inspections, just creating difficulty. In a lot of cases, we heard people were just parking trucks. That's not uncommon. I've also heard that it wasn't as impactful as what it has been in the past, and that a lot of scales weren't necessarily doing what was expected. But based on just the hype last week, not really worrying too much about the facts at the moment, how much does something like a DOT Blitz week impact the way you think about capacity?
Really, how it impacts me specifically at my current organization is it's more so an impact on maybe how we go about pricing and short notice opportunities. Like I said, with our book of business, right? So if it's something that it's a same day pickup, and we really have to take a good look at the origin and destination zones and things like that. It's really not necessarily about our carrier network. It's more about how we go out to price things with lead time, because we understand that certain capacity on a Thursday afternoon, Friday afternoon is going to look a lot different this week. But when it comes to really our network and how we were impacted, we didn't have any drivers that were shut down with freight on their trailer, right? We didn't have any of our regulars call in and say, hey, I'm not working this week because of that. So that was really good, but it was just kind of funny. I'm on LinkedIn quite often. It was kind of funny just scrolling in, and you saw one of two things. You saw someone saying, if your book of business is impacted by a DOT week, you're not doing a good enough job with carrier sales. I'm 100%. I always pick up on time, no matter if it's DOT or not. Then you had the other guys going, hey, things are getting impacted, and it is what it is. I'm going to be real about it. So it's just kind of interesting to see what was going on all last week, because the DOT Blitz week, along with one of the recent court rulings, is there's a lot of people out there that are just kind of post noise without maybe wanting to get anything out of it other than just making noise.
Right. Well, I think that never happens in this industry, right? So, yeah, there's lots of noise. A lot of the noise that's out there is just hold and wait. Something like a DOT Blitz week, from operators, so from the brokers and the carriers, there was some discussion from the end that had concern around it. From the driver's side, a lot of the drivers that I've talked to over the last week have said that it was a non-factor this year. So, who knows? I haven't looked at the statistics I don't think they've actually run the statistics out yet. That probably won't be for a while. But as opposed to previous years, this one feels a little less. So do you think customers, so if you go into the shipper side of this, how do they understand compliance issues, service, et cetera, and the availability of trucks? I mean, or how compliance issues can affect the availability of trucks and the pricing of trucks. Do you feel that there's a good understanding there, or?
I would say it's not the most fun answer, but I would say it definitely depends, right? For me, I've noticed that the size of the organization from the shipper's perspective really can create a difference in, does the person who's requesting a shipment understand fully what's going on once they request that shipment? Or is it a very large organization where you have 20 to 30 different people sitting at a desk that have never been on a dock before, and they're the ones putting in the shipment request, right? So some of our mid-size guys they request the shipment, they load the truck, they say hi to the driver, they make sure paperwork is passed off. So from that point of view, they definitely understand what's going on. But also, being on the brokerage side, I take some sort of ownership in saying, hey, I want to be able to educate my customer on kind of how our process goes. And because sometimes the cheapest truck isn't the right truck, right? Especially if it's someone who's maybe a little bit more price sensitive. From my perspective, I'm focusing on the right driver and the right carrier for that shipment versus the cheapest or the quickest, things like that. So also taking that viewpoint of ownership from my perspective, saying, hey, I will want to educate my customer a little bit, just because there's so many things that are out of our control that when things go sideways, in which they will, not all shipments are going to run 100% on time every time, right? They understand what exactly we're working on, the position we're trying to put their freight in. And like I said, we're going to put it on the right truck, not necessarily the one that can get there the fastest or the cheapest.
Sure. Yeah. Always better to put it on reliable instead of questionable. So looking down that road, what's a good thing to ask a carrier before a load, before you even send them the load? I mean, how do you kind of open it today in the spot market world? I haven't brokered freight in a lifetime, in a generation, let's say. So what's a good thing to ask a carrier before you even send them the load or the rate con in this kind of heavy enforcement environment?
Yeah, well, from a technology standpoint, it's night and day from even when I started in terms of what we're able to look at, even prior to getting into the nitty gritty of about a specific shipment, right? So looking at the MC number DOT, a lot of these vetting platforms now have heat maps to show the ELD logs, where are they pinging, their history, things like that, right? So really looking into, does this shipment make sense for this carrier? Let's say that they have a handful of van loads, but all they do is they stay on the East Coast. Maybe they dip a little bit into Georgia towards Texas, but they stay on the East Coast and they're calling about a shipment that's in Minnesota, North Dakota. Okay, you're kind of randomly out there. It doesn't look like you ever ping out there. What's your interest in this shipment, right? Trying to avoid that conversation of, oh, I'm just chasing money and miles, because that might not make the most sense for this customer, especially if it's kind of on a more of a repeat basis or a consistent region or lane that we're running, right? So is this an area or a lane that they understand, right? Do they have something as a coming back? Is this product that they haul often? If it's an open deck, do they understand about different size tarps, chains versus straps, things like that? And, something that we've gotten into, especially depending on where your customers are picking up at, knowing what else is around there. When I was booking freight pretty consistently, one of the questions I would ask if I had to pick up out of Wichita, Kansas, I would make sure to ask every time, hey, where are you getting empty at? Because I knew a couple miles down the road from my customer was a Pepsi plant. And I'm no hate on Pepsi, but if I heard that a driver was getting unloaded at the Pepsi facility, I probably wasn't booking them, just because there was no guarantee he was getting empty when his appointment was. So really understanding those specific markets, not just from a customer and freight level, but also just an area and a region in general. Just, like I said, if I hadn't asked those questions, I might have had a couple more fall offs than before, just because of not being able to get empty and hit my pickup and things like that.
Absolutely. That's just experience with the tribal knowledge of running a region. So moving a bit more into freight, spot and contract strategies are getting definitely more complicated right now. How do you think shippers should think about using both when, frankly, it's like we're playing a game right now? So it's not very predictable.
No, it's really not. And, putting kind of myself in the shoes of that shipper, right? Looking at, how do I want to contract out my book of business versus looking at going to a spot board, right? From a shipper's perspective, your procurement network, who you have overseeing your brokers or your asset fleet, to say, hey, who can kind of get me out of a pinch in short notice? That's really where it comes down to. Are you going to blast it out to 100 different brokers? Or are you going to have a small folder of 10 to 12 that you can really trust on short notice capacity? Because like I said earlier, not everything's going to go 100%. So having 10 really trusted providers versus 100 that you consistently blast it out to, it makes a ton of difference in terms of consistency, right? One of the things that we like is we want some of our larger accounts, right? We want those loaders to see the same driver more often than not, because when they see our guy, they know that he knows what he's doing and they don't have to worry about it, right? So that procurement network from just a broker and fleet management side of things is kind of how I'm thinking about it. And then from just the size of business or the size of lanes, we're still getting these RFPs that have thousands and thousands of lanes on it. And it's like, well, how we go about it is we still have to price what we think we can be competitive at, but also we're not going to price ourselves to just fail immediately and then get kicked out of the network, right? I think from a shipper's perspective, you also kind of want to know, hey, how are our partners strong, or are our partners strong in certain regions versus others, and not trying to have maybe one or two people take 10,000 shipments a year. Maybe we break it up slightly more, just again to kind of get back to that consistency, because at the end of the day, my job is to move someone's shipment as efficiently and as safely as possible, right? So I'm not going to set myself up to fail by trying to say, yes, I can do everything at all times. So from a shipper's perspective, if you're getting someone telling you, hey, I can do everything and anything you want, most likely not the case.
So are customers more realistic today about what it takes to protect service on your side? Or are they kind of expecting pandemic level responses? I've heard some people talking in that range, but I don't feel we're anywhere near that, and we're probably not going there. So, but ultimately, are those conversations happening at the customer level or not?
I would say yes, they definitely are. And that kind of ties back into wanting to do the hard right. Having these conversations that go into wanting to be as transparent as possible of your ability to service the project or the annual bid that they're looking to tender out. So being able to have those customer facing conversations on exactly what you can provide for them and what makes the most sense and what might not is key. Because again, from a service standpoint, I know there's some mindset out there about just quote everything and anything, and that's how you build out a book of business. And that may be true, right? I've never been a freight agent or kind of a working for a small brokerage where you're really trying to just get up and started. So I don't have that experience, but kind of where we are at right now, it's just you have to do what makes sense for the success of the customer, and just committing to things over and over again and failing is not success for the customer, because you think about your customer's customer, they're the ones that are actually going to feel the pain about not having their stuff delivered to them, whether it's commercial, residential, things like that.
So how do you end up having that hard conversation with the customer then? Like you said, having those conversations is important, but when you have that hard conversation with a customer who's just simply, I mean, we've seen rates go wild. So that's just simply on you're not able to provide the rate that they want, but you're fairly confident that no one's going to be able to. So how do you have that conversation when the customer doesn't get the rate that they want, and the service, they expect is at a particular level? So, I mean, how are those conversations happening these days?
Yeah, as many times as I possibly can, I'd like to approach it not just with the problem, but also with a solution in hand, right? Saying, hey, I can't do exactly X for you, but here's what I can do, or here's what I've already done to set us up in a very specific position to succeed, right? Not just saying, a pretty consistent example is not just saying, hey, our truck's going to be late, or hey, we had a fall off, right? And just kind of leaving it there. Even if it's just over an email, just sending it out and saying, hey, our driver is going to be late because of X. He's on the road and he's tracking via GPS. We see his pings. Here's his mileage away. Here's where he's moving. Or we had to get a different driver on this specific shipment for XYZ who's coming in, and he's a better position to do whatever, right? So coming to the table with not just the problem, but also the solution. Just because a lot of the times what we see is that reaction or that response from the customer is just wildly different if you come with a solution in hand, because they also understand, like I said, not everything is going to go smoothly 100% of the time.
No, something I like that considers every failure is an opportunity, right? So, if you have a problem with that particular customer, how you handle that problem is a big differentiator. You can make them feel good about having a problem if you play it the right way. And certainly coming with the fix in hand, or solutions, at least some solutions in hand, is one good way to do that. But that hyper communication back and forth between your vendors moving freight and your customers directly is extremely important. So how are you maintaining that level of communication to be able to provide that level of service?
Well, maintaining that level of communication, that also, again, not a fun answer, but it depends on what the customer actually requires, right? Just understanding your customers and what they need of you, because there may be certain customers where they'll send you a pickup request and they don't even need to hear from you until it's delivered. And then there's other accounts who need updates every 30 minutes to an hour, right? So understanding what is required from your customer in terms of communication and visibility is key, right? Because for myself, I manage X amount of accounts, right? There's only so much I can be able to do. There's only so many people I can talk to on the phone at the exact same time, or emails I can send out every hour, right? So really understanding what's required by your customer and what they like in terms of communication style can make your job a lot easier.
Perfect answer. All right, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back in about a minute and a half. If you have any questions for Chris, queue them up, and we'll see you all in just a couple minutes.
If your fleet's downtime looks like chaos, you're missing out on GLCS. In the time-critical world of trucking and logistics, every minute counts. Meet GLCS, your expert partner in managed IT and technology services. We integrate seamlessly with your team, bringing seasoned IT professionals with deep trucking and logistics expertise. Imagine your software updates running smoothly, complex issues resolved quickly, and operations humming with efficiency. GLCS has your back. Our support doesn't just fix problems, it prevents them with our industry connections and proactive approach. We keep your trucks rolling and your brokers working. Think of us as the added resource your company needs to unleash its full potential. Visit glcs.net today and keep your business driving forward. GLCS, where efficiency meets expertise.
And we are back. So let's flip into talking about customer expectations. I think we were kind of leaning into more customer discussions there. So your organization talks, I think the website leans into and other items talk about relationship, trust, visibility, service. What does that feel like in your organization, or how does your organization lean into those things when something goes wrong at that 4:30 or 5 o'clock on a Friday?
Yep. So from that point of view, right, there's a reason that we're set up the way we are at 10 Logistics, right? About that service-based mindset and, that relationship approach to a customer versus transactional approach. So when it comes to something going wrong at 4:30, 5 o'clock in the afternoon, right, we have all hands on deck to be able to sort things out, right? And we have a fantastic team here, which has been a huge help. And culture within an organization is critical, especially the size we are. We're about a head count of 20, right? So being able to establish a culture of service and a culture of care around what we do, right? We want people in the building that are going to care about what they do, how they perform, care about our customer. So being able to set that culture internally can then lead to those results of being able to execute on wanting to be a service first business. Versus, other providers out there might be a price-focused business or a speed-focused business or a very specific niche-focused business, right? So when it comes to that mindset around service first, really having that internal culture be built out and then continuously worked on, right? We got someone we call a culture captain, right? It's not something we just kind of set and forget. It's just we always want to have someone working towards being able to maintain that, just because that's how you are able to get your best out of your people, is really establishing that culture and having a team in place that can revolve around it and really live it out.
Yeah, I mean, culture is absolutely massive to any organization. Something I tell a lot of people, you can try to define your culture all you want, but your culture is very fluid. So once it's established and you have that kind of baseline, you do create the guides to go through and ensure that culture stays on the path that you want it to, or at least attempt to. But as a leader within an organization, you really have very little to do with the actual culture. It's the staff that's out there doing it. So the only thing you can do as a leader is lead by example and promote the values of the culture that you want to have be present in your organization. But sounds like you guys have accomplished that. So moving on to the customer side and kind of how they look at things, what do you feel a great customer does that makes it easier for you and your carriers to perform?
That's a really good question. I would say when it comes to the kind of that impact that the shipper can bring, I would just say it's in terms of consistency. That's probably the key, right? Is being able to say, hey, the shipments that we're requesting, whether it's the same facility or different facilities, our consistency in terms of what we send out as a request, how we go about loading, the people that are working there, what's required of that specific shipment, just consistency and aligning with what was set prior to the shipments going live, right? Because, these discovery calls or these prospecting calls, really getting to understand what your customer is like, what these different facilities are like. that consistency is huge. And then from us, right, getting boots on the ground, sending our sales guys all over the place to actually visit these customers face to face and say, hey, what exactly do you need from us so we can perform as best as possible? And then on the flip side, what we ask is, hey, how consistent can you be in terms of your requests and your communication, just so we can fully understand exactly what you're sending over as quick as possible. Again, being in that spot freight focus, saying, hey, time is critical. Saying, hey, what all can you send me right away so I fully understand exactly what you're asking and I can move forward.
Good answer. Consistency, I think, from anyone, but especially from a customer, that they do what they say they're going to do, and you can expect it, then that sets you up for wins. I mean, that's ultimately you're working to what they've stated they need, and they're not throwing you any surprises. How often are you guys visiting your customers these days? We went through a cycle there where nobody wanted anyone to come in, but I feel like that's changed, in that the time to almost go old school door knocking type sales is of some value, as opposed to 3-4 years ago where we weren't visiting anyone. So
yeah, I would definitely, multiple times a quarter for sure for our sales team, right? And especially right now when there's such a large looming topic about, driver quality, driver capacity in terms of MCs and trucks pulling off the road, rates going through the roof, right? Being able to have these sit down face-to-face conversations about what we're actively doing to support your operation is a 100% a differentiator, in my opinion. So getting out as often as we can, not just with, our top 2-3 customers, but all of our accounts that we can say, hey, we want to come meet you and be able to, again, better understand what you got going on and how we can best service it is massively important. And I'm starting to see a little bit more of that picking up again, to your point, where starting to see a little bit more chatter about, hey, we got to get back out and we got to visit. We got to talk to our customers face to face, because it's not like it was a couple of years ago when people were getting hit up with 100+ requests a day and they didn't actually need anything. Now the environment's a little bit different, and having your core providers come out and visit you or come talk to you in person as often as possible is going to be huge going forward, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So to invert the question I asked a little bit ago on what do good customers do that make it easier for you to perform, I'm going to flip that and say, what customer behaviors cause you the most problems?
How do I answer honestly but not inappropriately? I would say really the main thing comes down to kind of going back to what I said about consistency. Inconsistent communication, or maybe hiding certain things about a shipment or about an expectation, or about, hey, actually in the background we have maybe 3-4 people working on this versus just you, right? Not being upfront with exactly what the expectation is or what I'm looking for can just cause a lot of unnecessary headaches, or even cause problems that wouldn't exist if everything was laid out right away. So I'd just say, maybe kind of coming to the broker, coming to the asset fleet with parts of the information maybe tucked behind your back a little bit. That's kind of what I've noticed that can just cause maybe problems that wouldn't exist if everything was kind of laid out right away. Because, talking about maybe working with multiple providers, that makes sense to me, right? I don't think a shipper only needs to work with one brokerage or one trucking company, but maybe having that conversation, this is something that's pretty hot for me. I am having other people look at it as well as you, and the first legitimate option I'm going to go with, so I just want to keep you posted, can make a big difference, to different organizations. So, coming to the table with exactly what you're looking for laid out can make things go a lot smoother.
Perfect. So a question from Bain. He queued this up a little bit ago. I've been holding till we get through kind of the customer focused side. But so what's one thing that you would tell Chris 9 years ago about your career, and what to lean into as well as what to avoid?
What's up, Bain? I would say, in probably the last 1.5 to 2 years, I really started taking networking seriously within the industry. And one of my favorite things about logistics is the people. So telling younger Chris, saying, hey, put yourself out there a little bit earlier, because there's a lot of fantastic people in this industry, and just kind of dive headfirst into connecting with people on LinkedIn, finding all these local events to be able to go out to. GLCS and freight movement. I've hosted a couple here in Minneapolis that I've been to that have been fantastic. So just really exposing yourself to the people in this industry as soon as you possibly can. That's been a massive benefit to me over the last year or two. And then things to avoid, something that I was not great at when I first started out is I would really latch on to when things didn't go wrong, and really realizing that there's so much that's out of my control. Using a lot of energy or a lot of emotion on something you can't necessarily control is just a waste. So just kind of understanding that, hey, sun's going to come back up tomorrow. There's going to be more freight tomorrow. It's going to be okay. We don't need to hold on to that frustration of maybe something going less than ideal. So that's something I was not great on right away.
Yeah, this industry, I mean, when you start out in it, you get your freight mares, you wake up at 3:00 in the morning thinking about moving freight. Sometimes you still do it today, but it usually scales down. But the freight mare conversation and how much it can impact you, and you seem to work in your sleep on options, and then you wake up the next morning and you're on your merry way, and then it all blows up in 10 seconds anyway. So one thing that you get really good at in this industry is being able to pivot and move with things that are not as established as you maybe hope they were. So sometimes that skill takes a little while. Other times, very few people can just roll in or come in and roll with the punches in this industry. It takes a little while. So you got to build that skin. So
yep, 100%. Kind of back to what you said about freight mares. I don't really remember when it stopped, but early on I could count on, no matter how hard I tried, every Sunday night I'd have a dream about a load that didn't exist, and I'd wake up thinking, oh, I'm just sweating for nothing. It was every Sunday night.
Yeah, I remember my kids. So I worked for a trucking company, and I shared this with other people too. So then, and someone else I know has this almost identical story. But the kids would play like they were listening to me talk on the phone to drivers and whatnot. And, they'd say, hey, take the freight over here, go here, or whatever. And so it was definitely a different time. Now older kids don't even know what I'm doing. But that being said, it certainly went away for the most part at some point, unless I get extremely focused on something. So that'll still pop up from time to time. So the other thing about networking, that's one thing that I jumped into the industry, and within 2 years I was networking like crazy. I would go to just a couple conferences a year, and as a carrier, and I would literally go to every booth in an expo hall and meet people. And had I not have done that, I think my career would have went in a significantly different direction than it did. Now, many of the people I spoke to 25 years ago are leaders in other organizations, and we have crazy long-term relationships that span companies, many companies in most cases. So definitely, put yourself out there. This isn't just to you, but obviously you're doing this already, but put yourself out there and meet more people. It only opens doors for you. So you've been tied to brokerage execution and scalability. What have you witnessed? And I know 10 is very controlled, but what have you witnessed in the market when brokerages grow too fast?
Yeah, when it comes to expedited growth, right, there's going to be that very heavy temptation to just have the we'll figure it out later mindset, just saying, hey, we'll do as much as we possibly can and just kind of figure it out later, right? And sometimes that can work out well. Sometimes it can't. Sometimes you might just have a big, ugly AR snowball behind you that you got to go and figure out, right? But when it comes to that, it's just how well do you really understand your own team's ability to be able to get things done? And like I said, sometimes it works out to have that we'll figure it out later mindset. Sometimes it can really burn you. So specifically when it comes to expedited growth, is it expedited growth because you have your core business that you're really expanding on and it's something you understand to a T, or is it expedited growth because you're just taking on all these new things at the exact same time and they're all a little bit different and it might just end up catching up to you in the end?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of times in my career, and it's mostly been on the asset side that we've done this, but some on the brokerage, where if you get the opportunity to bid something, you just put numbers in. And if it's in so from a carrier standpoint, if it's in a lane that you service, you can obviously be far more competitive. But there were times that, we'd have thousands and thousands of lanes we'd bid on for a particular customer. And, sometimes we get stuff, sometimes, hey, here's 20 loads a day you get to cover. And that's a whole nother pause when you get that. I think today, with how fast these bids are happening, there's lots of opportunity, but on the same hand, that opportunity can turn into failure very quickly if you overextend. So
Yep, definitely.
And the hyper response on the bids, I think, create more concern around this today than ever before. Usually a bid for us 20 years ago, we'd get it, we'd have a month or 2 or 3 in some cases to process it and then turn it back in, and there might be another round or 2 that goes faster than that, but the bid cycle was months long, not moments long. So
yep, I don't think that it's a coincidence that trying to be cheaper and faster kind of tied along exactly to this kind of boom and fraud that we've been seeing in driver quality. So I don't think it's a coincidence.
Yeah, no, not at all. And that cheaper, faster, better, stronger requires the better and stronger to work appropriately. Cheaper and faster many times turns out to not be. And why we maybe have seen service. I mean, you can call it fraud. You can also just say that we've had a lot of bad operators in the industry. There's certainly fraudulent operators, but then there's some that are just operating in ways that allow them to not be as compliant or as safety centered as they probably should be. And ultimately, I think that number is substantially larger than fraudulent carriers. I mean, it depends on how you add in someone who's shifting their MCs or chameleons or whatnot, and how you categorize them. But ultimately, I think that's what we've created a industry culture on to some level. You walk into any major trucking company, and safety is first, and it's well noticed. You're going to see that on signs, you're going to see it, and just everywhere. It's a beacon at the organization. But many yet accidents continue to climb, and many smaller organizations that are maybe not as focused on good, healthy processes and long-term business strategy. I think that's exactly where we've gotten into in this industry over the last couple of years. Is we've allowed them to expand well beyond what they've ever had before. So I don't know if there's factual data around that, which is, we kind of talked about this before, but there's certainly, it certainly feels that way. So,
yeah, it was a great conversation 1, 2, 3 years ago that, everyone was up in arms about the driver shortage debate. And it kind of turned into, well, this actually kind of means now the number of qualified drivers versus just the number of drivers in general. We might have a qualified driver shortage. So kind of the conversation twisted, but that was a fun one everyone liked to have.
Yeah, I mean, and the driver shortage, I think that right now we don't need drivers. But the reality of it is, I think we're going to end up back in this conversation, and we can define it however you want. But we'll end up back in that conversation once the market kicks again, assuming it does kick again. And you look at the average age of a truck driver is 47, I think now. I might be wrong, but it's around 47 years old. And the average age that a driver lives, so a full-time career-long driver lives to be, on average 61 years old. So those are not, when the average is 47 years old, you definitely, and then the average life expectancy is only 61. There's some numbers there that don't really math out very well. So we may end up, and it's not a shortage of people who will drive a truck. It's a shortage of people who will drive a truck for what you're asking them to do. And I've been saying that one for 20 years. We don't have a problem getting drivers. We have a problem getting drivers out of one job into here. So there's something that's not being that's just something that's not desirable for a driver to come work for you, or to stop doing what they're currently doing in their current job and go back to driving. So, but I do feel like it won't be that far off before we're going to start having a problem with seated drivers at companies. So, especially if the market does get better. So,
yep.
All right, we got about 9 minutes left. Let's talk a little bit about Montgomery versus Carib. What have you heard out there? You're probably more dialed into brokerage than I am. What's been on everyone's mind over the last week?
Yeah, and just kind of looking at the industry as a whole, there's a lot of reaction immediately, and there's a lot of different reactions. Oh, small brokers are screwed, large brokers are screwed, agents are screwed, right? Everyone had a little bit different of an opinion, but kind of how I've been looking at it and how our team internally has been looking at it as this is just yet another reason to say, hey, how dialed in are we on our vetting process, on our qualification process? How often are we auditing our own process, right? Things like that. Dale Prax, who you knew very well, he'll say constantly that the biggest risk for brokerages is people just not following their own rules.
Right.
And when in regards to the actual ruling itself, I can't remember who said it, but I saw, and they kind of compared this to in a hospital, right? The healthcare professionals will write down just like an egregious amount of information. Almost all of that information never gets seen again, but it's written down, right? So the idea that you're 100% of the time following your specific process that's in place to be able to vet out these carriers is the key here, right? How well are you setting your standards for onboarding these carriers and monitoring? And then how often are you auditing your own process to make sure you're not maybe falling behind as things change, right? Because from a technology standpoint, things are going to change maybe even faster than they have been the last couple of years, which is crazy to think about. But our internal attitude towards it is it's just yet another reason to say, hey, how well is our process designed? How often do we audit it? Just kind of that idea of our biggest risk to ourselves is breaking our own rules.
No, it's true. It's something Dale's been chiming for years. Actually, I'm going to be with him, I think, next Thursday. I'm going to be on a podcast. I'll be down in Chattanooga, and he and I will be on it together, I think. So, but I think you're 100% correct, though, and like you said, Dale's been chiming on this for a number of years, but it kind of goes across the board for every organization. When you start cutting corners, you get unexpected results, and that's not always a fraudulent result, but it does open you up to that possibility. So along with the Montgomery versus Carib thing, we've heard all kinds of noise. I mean, do you feel like this is going to benefit the larger organizations, or do you feel like, this is kind of a non-factor?
From my personal experience in our what I just say is a small to mid-sized brokerage, right? I don't think that we're going to see a ton of impact in our ability to be able to, keep our people in place to follow the rules that have been established. From a large scale organization with hundreds of employees, sure, I can see a little bit more of a risk for someone cutting a corner on, again, the classic Friday 5 p.m. example, right? So how well do your leaders in your organization kind of set the tone and hold the line, hold the standard is key for this specific thing. Just because, it was a 9-0 vote. It wasn't something that was really debated too hard. It was pretty clear, hey, you can be held liable for this. So how well are the leaders in your building kind of holding that standard?
And that's a solid point. If you are a well-run mid-sized organization or smaller, and you're doing all the right things, this has very little impact to your organization unless it becomes a market-related impact, which that's outside of your control. But certainly it shouldn't be a major impact. If you are a large organization that is not doing what it should be doing, which I would say there's probably not very many of those out there anymore. But if you don't have solid controls in place and you need to establish them, that's going to be moving the Titanic, because this all goes into effect right now. I mean, ultimately it started last Thursday and even went historic. So, there's a million lawsuits that are going to be pushed forward now because of this ruling. And I honestly, this is why I've been telling everybody, you just kind of hold. You shore up your processes if you need to, and you hold, because 50 or 100 lawsuits need to get processed before we know what this actually means. So as far as the carrier vetting side, what's the line between reasonable carrier vetting and expecting brokers to kind of become a full-blown safety department?
That's something that's very interesting to think about, right? Because most of the platforms, you can just kind of get the basics. You get the safety score, you get the authority, you get the insurance policies to look at equipments and drivers and things like that, right? And something that I've noticed is a lot of this stuff really goes all the way down to the driver level. It might not necessarily be an MC number issue or, a company-wide issue. It really gets down to the driver level. But I think it comes down to a combination of these platforms that exist specifically for looking at carrier performance, and your own internal team being able to talk to carriers on the phone, over email, just being able to get that, that spidey sense, quote unquote. So having these conversations with your carriers, as well as using the technology that's available, because again, it's only going to continue to change and get better and get faster and things like that. So where that line is, I really have no idea. But again, if what you say is your process and what you establish as your metrics for vetting a carrier is qualified or unqualified, you better stick to it.
No, absolutely. So I get, this is that question I asked you is kind of where I think the obscurity of this comes in to me, is how far down the road are we going to get if brokerages and technically shippers can be held accountable for drivers that are moving their freight. So, and that driver may be an employee of another company, but the question really becomes how far down the road are we going to go, and to what level is the broker going to be responsible for the individual driving the truck? So that's probably the largest if that I see out there right now, and that has my concern. But we won't know, once again, where we end up until some of these lawsuits process, really. So,
yep.
So Chris, where can people find you?
Yeah, I would say the best way to reach me is on LinkedIn, right? Just my name, right? I, like everyone else, get the spam messages every single day, but I still read every one. One thing I will promote quick is the Twin Cities Transportation Club, a group Nate is a part of. We got an event coming up next Thursday down in Lakeville. That's a little networking group that I started a while back just for people in Minneapolis, St. Paul area. So Twin Cities Transportation Club and myself on LinkedIn, that'd be the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Yeah, and I don't think I'm making it. I don't land until 10:30. So you guys had it in Lakeville. I live in Lakeville, but I can't.
Finally got it on the south side.
Yeah. And it's not an hour-long drive for me, but I got called out to a customer, and then I've got a thing on Thursday too. So, but I'll be thinking about you guys. You're at a place not too far from where I live. So, Chris, it's been a pleasure having you on. I always wish you the best. It's always great chatting with you. Any thoughts or anything else before we wrap this one up?
I think I'm all set. I appreciate you having me on, Nate. Always great to talk to you.
Perfect. All right. Thanks a lot, Chris. So markets change, rates move, customers get louder, capacity tightens, compliance pressure rises. And now with decisions like Montgomery versus Carib putting more attention on broker responsibility, the margin for sloppy execution keeps getting smaller. The answer isn't panic, it's process. It's knowing your carriers, That's nothing new. Communicating early, also nothing new. Pricing with reality, for the most part, nothing new. Serving the customer without lying to yourself about what the market can actually support, that's questionable right now. So a lot of dynamic shifting in the market, but it's building a brokerage that can grow without losing its standards. And I think that's the important statement there. Doing the hard right over the easy wrong. It's not just a phrase. It's a difference between companies that survive tough markets and difficulties and companies that get exposed by them. So that's it for today. Appreciate everybody's time. Stay curious, stay informed, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible. Until next time, drive forward with purpose and innovation. Thanks for watching.